By the time we reached the creek, my gloves were so slick with blood I could barely keep hold of the stretcher. Mason was in front, bent low, one shoulder under the weight. I was at the back. June was to my left with the floodlight, sweeping it through the trees in quick, shaking bursts. And on the stretcher between us was something I still cannot explain without hearing my own voice sound insane. It was a werewolf, not the storybook version. Not some Hollywood monster standing tall in a moonlit clearing and roaring on cue. This thing was heavier, leaner, almost wrong to look at. Its fur was dark with mud and blood. One ear was torn nearly off. Its ribs rose and fell in ragged bursts beneath a chest crisscrossed with wounds that looked too deep, too clean, too deliberate. And it was terrified. That was the part I could not get out of my head then, and I still cannot now. It was not fighting us. It was not snapping or clawing or thrashing to get free. It kept trying to lift its head, not to attack, but to look behind us. Every few seconds it would let out this low, broken sound from deep in its throat, like it wanted to warn us but did not have the strength. Something moved to our right, not a branch, not a deer stepping through brush, not the heavy, careless sound of a bear. This was soft, measured, like whatever it was knew exactly how much noise a human ear could miss. June stopped walking. The light froze on a stand of birch trees, white trunks glowing like bones in the dark. "You hear that?" she whispered. No one answered, because we all heard it. One step, then another, then silence again. Mason cursed under his breath and shifted his grip. "Keep moving." We did. That was the first mistake. The second was believing distance meant safety. We pushed through wet undergrowth, boots sinking into the forest floor, every breath steaming in the cold night air. The radio on my vest hissed, then cracked with a burst of static so sharp it made me flinch. I smacked it, tried the emergency channel, got nothing but distortion. Then came the sound. I have spent most of my adult life in wilderness search and recovery. I know what foxes sound like. I know bobcats, elk, coyotes, owls, feral dogs, mountain lions. I know how fear changes animal calls and how the woods can twist sound until it seems human. But this was none of that. It started like a child trying not to cry. Then it bent upward into something thin and metallic. Then it ended in a wet clicking noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The thing on the stretcher jerked so violently it nearly rolled off. "Easy," I muttered, though I did not know if I was talking to it or to myself. We thought we were saving it, but we were bringing something with us. That truth was still waiting for me, still hidden in the dark just beyond the reach of our lights. At the time, all I knew was that something was matching our pace, just out there between the trees, and every time we sped up, it sped up too. Then June swept the beam behind us. For half a second I saw two pale reflections low to the ground, not eyes like an animal, higher apart than they should have been, too still. Then the beam shook, slipped off target, and they were gone. Mason said not to look back anymore. So of course I looked back again. And that was when I realized the werewolf was not afraid of us. It was afraid of whatever was following us through the forest. It had started as the most routine call of the month. Our team was not military, not law enforcement, not some secret unit people on the internet like to imagine. We were a contracted wilderness recovery team working out of northern Washington. Missing hikers, downed hunters, abandoned camps, injured wildlife when local agencies needed extra hands. Long hikes, bad weather, little sleep. Most of the job was waiting. The rest was hoping what you found was still alive. That week had been quiet. Too quiet, Mason said. He was our team lead, former smoke jumper, built like a tree stump and twice as hard to move. June handled navigation and medgear. Carter ran comms and documentation. Eli was our tracker, the best I have ever seen. Me, I was the one who kept records, stabilized casualties, and usually drew the short straw when something had to be carried out. The dispatch report came in just after noon. Unmarked blood trail, possible poaching activity, deep inside a restricted section of forest near an old fire road no one had used in years. A ranger had spotted circling crows and flagged the coordinates. We were told to check it before dark. That is the word that ruins people. We hiked in under a sky the color of dirty steel. The trees got denser the farther we went, old growth packs so tight the light thinned to a permanent dusk under the canopy. By late afternoon we found the first blood. Eli crouched over it in silence. "Too much for a deer," he said finally. "Bear?" June asked. He shook his head. "Trail is wrong." The blood was dark and tacky, splashed low across roots and ferns, then dragged in long streaks like something huge had staggered, fallen, gotten up, and kept moving. The further we tracked it, the stranger it became. Broken saplings at shoulder height, chunks of bark torn from trunks, deep grooves in the soil that looked almost like claw marks, except they were spaced too evenly, too intentionally. Carter made a joke then, something about finding Bigfoot with a drinking problem. Nobody laughed. I remember the smell before I remember the sight. Wet earth, rotting leaves, and beneath all that something musky and sour, like animal fur burned over hot metal. Eli raised his fist for us to stop. Ahead, beyond a fallen cedar, the brush had been flattened into a shallow hollow. It looked like a crash site. Branches splintered outward, mud turned black, more blood soaked into the ground. At first I saw only a massive shape half hidden in shadow. Then bear. Then neither. Because bears do not have hands. It moved when June stepped closer with the light. One arm came up to shield its face. Not a paw. An arm. Muscled, fur matted with blood. Fingers tipped with black, cracked claws that dug into the dirt as it tried to drag itself backward. Carter stumbled away so fast he fell. Mason just stared. The face turned toward us slowly. There was a snout, yes, and teeth too long for any wolf that had ever lived. But the eyes were not animal eyes. They were wide with shock, with pain, with something so recognizably human I felt cold all over. It had been shot once, maybe twice, at some point long before we found it. But those were old injuries. The fresh wounds were worse. The left flank was torn open in strips as if something had peeled the flesh back. Its shoulder looked punctured by something narrow and deep, one hind leg bent wrong. There were marks around its throat like something had nearly strangled it. June whispered, "What is that?" No one answered, because all of us knew. Not in a rational way, not in a way any report could survive. But the truth landed in that clearing all the same. This was no animal. This was a werewolf. And judging by the way it kept trying to look over its own shoulder, it had not been hunting. It had escaped. You would think seeing a werewolf in the middle of the forest would be the moment the world stopped making sense. It should have been. But shock has a way of becoming practical when you are trained to respond before you fully understand. Mason ordered us to fall into procedure, secure the area, assess the casualty, prepare extraction. The fact that the casualty had 6-inch claws and a jaw that could probably take off a man's arm somehow became secondary to the amount of blood it was losing. June knelt beside it with the med kit, hands trembling but precise. I helped her. We worked around the injuries as best we could, wrapping what we could wrap, injecting sedatives we were not at all sure would work on something that should not exist. The creature flinched at every touch, but it never bit, never lashed out. It just kept watching the tree line with a desperation that slowly infected the rest of us. Eli circled the clearing, checking prints. Carter stayed on the radio, trying to raise dispatch and getting only fragments. Mason cut saplings and rigged a field stretcher. It should have sounded busy. It should have sounded normal. Instead, after the first few minutes, I noticed something was missing. No wind either. No insects. Even the distant creek we had crossed on the way in seemed gone. The forest had not gone quiet. It had gone still. I looked up and realized everyone else had noticed too. The silence had weight to it, like the woods were holding their breath. Then the werewolf made a sound I had not heard before. Not a growl, not pain. Recognition. Its whole body locked, its ears pinned flat, lips peeled back just enough to expose its teeth. Not toward us. Past us. Into the dark. I turned with the light. At first there was nothing. Just trunks. Patches of thinning dust. Then, about 30 yards out, between two cedars, I saw a pair of reflections. Eyes, I thought. But something about them was wrong. Too high, then too low, as if whatever they belonged to had shifted posture without moving its body. They did not blink. They did not sway. They just watched. June saw them too. Her hand tightened on my arm. Mason called out, voice hard. "Identify yourself." Nothing answered. Carter laughed, thin and false. "Probably a deer." "No deer stands like that," Eli said. The light trembled across the trees. For an instant the reflections vanished. Then another pair appeared farther to the left. Then another deeper back. Not one set, several, watching from different distances, not moving closer, just observing. The werewolf tried to rise off the ground. It nearly tore the bandages loose doing it. It made a harsh, choking noise and swiped weakly toward the dark, then toward us, then toward the trail behind us as if ordering us to leave. At first I thought pain had driven it feral, but then something did not make sense. Predators do not panic at the sight of deer. They do not tremble in raw, instinctive terror unless something above them on the food chain has arrived. Mason told everybody to stay focused. Eyeshine can play tricks in low light, he said. Brush movement. He was trying to anchor us. I understand that now. At the time it sounded like denial. Because the longer we stood there, the more certain I became that we were being studied. Not by animals circling a strange scent. Not by curious hikers. By something patient enough to stay just beyond our certainty. Carter got a momentary signal and tried to call for pickup, but the radio spat back a burst of garbled sound that almost resembled words. He pulled the headset away, frowned, and asked if anyone else had spoken. No one had. When I turned back toward the trees, the eyes were gone. All of them, and somehow that felt worse. Because whatever had been watching us no longer needed to do it from a distance. We moved out just before full dark. Leaving the creature there felt impossible. Bringing it with us felt insane. But Mason made the call fast. If we abandoned it and walked away, we would spend the rest of our lives wondering what we had left to die in those woods. So we lifted the stretcher and started toward the fire road, planning to reach the trucks by nightfall. That plan lasted maybe 20 minutes. At first, the signs were small enough to ignore if you wanted to. A branch bending back upright after something heavy had brushed past it. A patch of mud near the trail where Eli stopped, crouched, and frowned. "What?" Mason asked. Eli did not answer right away. He put 2 fingers beside the print and measured. Then he stood slowly. "I have never seen tracks like that," he said. We all gathered around. The impression in the mud was long, narrow, and too deep. It had no clear paw pad, no hoof split, no bare heel. It looked almost manufactured, as if something with jointed points had pressed into the ground and then twisted slightly on the way out. "How old?" I asked. "Fresh," Eli said. He looked at me. The trail behind us had been clear a minute earlier. Now there were 3 prints. Then 5. Then none again where the ground hardened. Carter said maybe we had missed them on the way in. Nobody argued with him, because arguing would have meant admitting what all of us were starting to think. That something was not just nearby. It was moving inside our path after we passed through it. The radio problems got worse after sunset. Static became clipped syllables. Syllables became almost voices. Carter switched channels 3 times, changed batteries, even pulled the antenna and reseated it. Nothing helped. Every transmission came back distorted, layered with a second sound underneath like someone whispering too close to the mic. Then we heard my voice. At least that is what Eli swore it was. We had stopped in a narrow corridor of hemlocks to reset our grip on the stretcher when somebody from the trees ahead said, clear as day, "Wait up." Everyone froze. I had not spoken. June turned toward me anyway. Eli lifted his light and aimed it into the dark. "Who said that?" No answer. Then it came again, farther to the right. "Wait up." Same pitch. Same gravel in the throat. Same clipped way I say the word when I am tired. My stomach dropped. Carter muttered no. Mason drew the sidearm he carried for cougars and fired the beam of his flashlight toward the sound. "Show yourself." The woods stayed empty, but not silent. Because somewhere out there, just beyond where the light faded, something shifted its weight and took one slow step. Then another. The werewolf on the stretcher began to thrash, not blindly this time, purposefully. It ripped one wrist free of the straps, seized the side rail, and tried to drag itself off. Mason barked at us to hold it, but when I grabbed its arm, it turned its head and looked directly at me. There was intelligence in those eyes, pain too, but stronger than both was urgency. "Run," that look said. "Not from it, from this place." We almost broke then. I think if the trucks had been visible through the trees, if the road had been 100 yards closer, we would have sprinted. But deep woods at night stretch distance in a cruel way. Every landmark feels familiar. Every turn feels wrong. The dark erases certainty. We kept moving. And then Carter disappeared. One moment he was behind us, swearing softly while he smacked the radio against his palm. The next there was a crash in the brush to our left, a yell cut short and nothing. Mason dropped his end of the stretcher. "Carter!" he shouted. No answer. We swept the lights through the trees and found only snapped branches and a patch of dirt torn into a fan shape like someone had been dragged sideways with impossible force. June called his name until her voice cracked. Then, from somewhere much deeper in the forest, came Carter's voice. "Help me." It sounded weak, panicked, and utterly wrong. Not because the words were strange. Because he had been taken at least 50 yards the wrong direction in less than 5 seconds. Mason started toward the voice. The werewolf lunged off the stretcher and grabbed his jacket. Not hard enough to hurt him. Hard enough to stop him. Its lips curled. It shook its head once. Then we heard Carter again. Closer this time. "Help me." But the mouth shape was off. The rhythm too perfect. Like something had memorized the sound without understanding fear. That was when Mason stopped trying to save Carter. That was when we all realized something was tracking us. And it had already learned how we sounded. We could not stay where we were, and we could not follow Carter's voice into the dark. So we moved. Not fast. Not clean. Just forward. The werewolf could no longer stay on the stretcher. Whether the sedatives were failing or fear had burned through them, I do not know. It staggered on its own beside us, limping badly, one arm held tight against its torn side. Up close it was more disturbing than it had been in the clearing. Too human in some places. Too animal in others. Its face shifted when it breathed, muscles bunching under the fur in ways that made me think of a person trying and failing to wear the shape of a wolf. June kept glancing at it like she wanted to ask 1,000 questions and was terrified of hearing the answer. I focused on the wound. That was the one thing I understood. At the next stop, under a shelf of exposed rock where we had a few minutes of cover, I told Mason I needed light and space. The creature sat against the stone, chest heaving, eyes never leaving the tree line. It let me approach. That still bothers me. It trusted me, or maybe was desperate enough to take the risk. I cut away the torn remains of fur and fabric around the shoulder wound. Under the blood I found something I could not make sense of. The punctures were narrow, deep, and set in a pattern too regular to be claws. 4 entries in an arc on one side, matching trauma on the other as if something had gripped and lifted it. The flesh around them was blackened, not burned exactly, but dead in a way I had only seen with venom or severe frostbite. June leaned closer. "That is not from bullet." "No," I said. "Not teeth either." Lower on the flank were parallel rents that looked like the body had been opened with hooks. Not ripped in frenzy. Opened with force and intent. There were fragments embedded in the wound. Not metal. Not bone. Something translucent and brittle like splintered insect shell. My hands went cold. "What kind of animal leaves this?" June whispered. "None," I said. The werewolf watched me as I held up one of the fragments in the light. Then it made a low, urgent sound and slapped its own chest with the flat of its hand. Then it pointed into the forest. June took a breath. "You are saying that did this to you?" The creature bared its teeth, not at us, but in what looked horribly like frustration. It dug claws into the dirt and drew a line. Then another crossing it. Then several marks around them like a cage. Finally, it jabbed one claw toward the woods again. "Hunting pattern," Eli said quietly from the edge of the rocks. "It is showing traps." The werewolf nodded. Actually nodded. For one surreal second, all 6 of us existed in a place where this made enough sense to continue. Mason crouched beside it. "What is out there?" The creature opened its mouth. A ruined sound came out. Not word. Its throat must have been damaged. So it tried a different way. It pressed a claw to its chest, then drew it across its neck. Then it pointed at us. "No," Jin said. I felt the meaning before I fully understood it. It was not saying the thing out there wanted to kill it. It was saying the thing out there kills everything that gets close. Then it did something I still see when I try to sleep. It reached for my jacket, found the patch on the shoulder with our team logo, and touched each of the small stitched human figures on it one by one. Then it held up 4 claws. 4 left. We all looked around at each other. June. The werewolf. Carter gone. The count matched. The creature lowered its hand and stared into the dark. That was when I realized we had been thinking about the wrong story the whole night. We had assumed we found the monster, but then something did not make sense. Why would a predator in its own domain run blind through miles of forest, bleeding, half dead, willing to collapse at the feet of humans it could easily kill? There was only one answer. It was prey. Worse than that, it had been made prey by something strong enough to terrify it. Something methodical enough to wound without finishing. Something that wanted it moving, wanted it desperate, wanted it to lead the way. Mason finally said what none of us wanted to. It was running from something worse. The werewolf looked at him, then at me, and very slowly, with a kind of exhausted horror, it nodded again. Once that truth settled over us, every strange detail from the day rearranged itself into a pattern. The silence in the woods, the eyes, the radio mimicry, the impossible speed, the wounds designed to cripple, not kill. This was not random violence. This was pursuit. Eli took point again, but now he was no longer tracking just one trail. He started seeing signs everywhere. Bark scored too high for any known predator. Long strips of moss peeled from the north side of trunks where something had passed and left a cold residue. Branches bent inward over the trail like someone had guided us with invisible hands. We were not escaping. We were being directed. The fire road should have been less than a mile away. We never found it. Instead, we kept looping through terrain none of us recognized. Same deadfall, same cluster of split stones, same shallow creek that seemed to appear from different angles no matter which direction we moved. June checked the compass and paled. It was spinning. Not fast, just enough to deny certainty. Carter had all the GPS units, so we tried phones. No signal, no satellite lock. Even the downloaded topography maps glitched and reloaded blank. Mason looked at the werewolf. You know this thing. The creature gave a tired, reluctant nod. He pointed into the dark. What is it? The werewolf pressed its claws into the dirt and drew a shape. Long body, too many joints. A circle for a head. Then around the head it marked lines radiating outward like antennae or a crown. After that it scratched out the eyes we had seen. Then 4. Then many. Eli swore under his breath. Multiple creatures, June said. The werewolf shook its head violently and slashed through the extra eyes, then dragged one finger through all of them, linking them together. One thing, I said. Or one thing that changes. That seemed closer to the truth. The creature pressed a claw to its own ear, then to mine, then mimed a mouth speaking. Mimicry. Then it touched the side of its head and tapped twice. Thinking, learning, studying. It was not just hunting by instinct. It was observing behavior and adjusting. Mason stood up and scanned the trees, sidearm drawn, though by then I think he knew how useless it might be. How long has it been on us, I asked. No one answered, because we all understood the real fear there. Maybe since the clearing. Maybe since we entered the forest. Maybe before. Then Eli found the first marker that proved it. On the underside of a rotting log beside the trail, hidden where only someone crouching low would see it, there were shallow cuts in the wood. 4 vertical grooves. Then farther along another set. And another. Each group spaced along our route. Not claw marks from travel. Count mark. Tally marks. The kind you make when you are keeping track. Or time. Or prey. My skin crawled. It had been watching longer than we knew. Learning our numbers. Mapping our reactions. Testing the edges of our fear. The next sign was worse. We reached a narrow ravine choked with alder and found, hanging from a broken branch at head height, Carter's radio. Not smashed, not dropped. The antenna had been bent into a clean loop. The push-to-talk button was held down with a strip of vine. Static hissed from the speaker in irregular bursts. June covered her mouth. Mason cut it down and the static changed instantly. Underneath it was breathing. Then Carter's voice came through almost perfectly this time. Behind you. We spun. Nothing. No movement. No shape. Just trees and dark and our own panic reflecting back at us. But that was enough. Because the moment we turned away from each other, the thing had already won something. It had proven it could move attention like a hand moving pieces on a board. That was the moment the story changed for me. Up until then, I still believed survival meant getting the werewolf out. After that, I understood something far more disturbing. Humans were no longer rescuers. We were no longer witnesses. We were part of the hunt now. And somewhere in the forest, beyond our broken lights and dying radios, an intelligence older or stranger than anything I had a name for was closing in, not because it was hungry, but because it had chosen us. Panic makes people loud at first. Then, if it lasts long enough, it makes them obedient. By the time full night swallowed the last to the sky, none of us argued anymore. We moved when Mason said move. We stopped when Eli raised a hand. We kept the lights low, stayed close, and tried not to answer any sound unless we could see the speaker's face. It still was not enough. Eli died first, or maybe disappeared is the better word, because I never found a body. We were cutting across a ridge where the ground fell steeply to one side and rose into dense timber on the other. Eli was 10 feet ahead, sweeping for safe footing. Then June heard her own voice from downslope. Eli over here. He stopped instantly. We all did. June was beside me. Her face went white. Do not move, Mason said. Too late. Something flashed through the trees. Not a body, not a shape I can describe honestly. Just a rearrangement of dark, fast, and liquid and wrong. Eli lunged backward, shouted once, and vanished uphill into a crash of branches that should have taken a bare 5 seconds to force through. We ran after him, found blood, found one boot, found long drag marks that stopped at a tree trunk and simply ended. No body, no prints leaving, nothing. The forest had swallowed him whole. After that, the thing stopped pretending it was distant. It circled openly, though never where the beam could hold it long enough to resolve. Sometimes we heard it pacing parallel to us, sometimes above us, which made no sense until I looked up and saw branches bending one after another high in the canopy, as if something heavy was moving overhead without ever showing itself. Then it started using us against each other. Mason heard his dead brother calling from the ravine. June heard a little girl crying somewhere off trail. I heard my mother. She has been dead 8 years. That was how precise it had become. Not just our voices, or at least close enough to break concentration. Every time someone paused too long, the werewolf shoved them forward or bared its teeth until they snapped out of it. By then our alliance was no longer uneasy. It was necessary. The creature moved with a survivor's intelligence, reading the woods, flinching seconds before we heard anything, steering us away from places that looked safe and probably were not. At one point, we entered a clearing no bigger than a living room. Moonlight touched the center just enough to show what waited there. A deer carcass, opened from sternum to pelvis with surgical neatness. Its organs had been arranged around it in a ring. And at the center of its rib cage sat Carter's flashlight, still on, beam pointed straight up. June broke then, not screaming. She started laughing under her breath, the kind of laugh people make when their mind is trying to step somewhere else. Mason grabbed her shoulders. Stay with me, for maybe another hour. We found an old game blind after midnight, half collapsed but still standing on a rise above the creek. Mason wanted to hold there until dawn. Solid walls on 3 sides. Clear line of sight to the front. Better than moving blind. We barricaded the door with broken planks and crouched in the dark, listening. Nothing came for several minutes. Then a knock. 3 taps. Human knuckles on wood. June started crying silently. Mason raised the gun. "Who is it?" he called before any of us could stop him. My heart still drops when I remember the answer. It spoke in Mason's voice. "Open up." The werewolf lunged across the blind and slammed its body against the door just as the latch tore loose from the outside. The whole structure shuddered. Something scraped slowly down the boards, leaving a sound like nails across wet bark. Then another voice came, this time Eli's. And then Carter's. I can TC. And then mine. Let it in. The thing was not just mimicking anymore. It was layering us, blending tones. Testing emotional combinations like a musician finding the right note to crack glass. We bolted through the back before it figured out how to unmake the wall. The next hour blurred into pure survival. Running through black timber, slipping in mud, June falling and nearly not getting up. Mason firing twice at movement that might have been branches and might not. The werewolf dragging me sideways an instant before something invisible slammed into the tree where my head had been. I never saw the strike clearly, only the aftermath. A cedar trunk caved inward at chest height, wood splinters raining, no shape attached. It used the forest like a weapon. It knew where roots would catch a boot, where ravines narrowed, where echoes lie. It did not need to overpower us directly when terror could hurt us. Then June vanished too. 1 second she was beside me. The next she answered her own voice from somewhere behind us and stepped backward into darkness before anyone could grab her. Her scream lasted less than 2 seconds. After that it was just Mason, the werewolf, and me. 3 wounded things running through a forest that had become a mind. 3 things that finally understood. There was no way out, not unless the hunter allowed one. Dawn never came. I know that sounds impossible, but time had unraveled in those woods. The sky lightened once behind the clouds, then dimmed again as if the forest itself could hold night in place. Maybe we had been going in circles for hours, maybe only minutes. Fear destroys sequence. What I know is that by the time Mason could barely stand and I was using a broken branch as a crutch, the werewolf stopped leading us away from the thing and started leading us toward something. A narrow basin ringed with black pines. The ground there was stripped bare, needles crushed flat in spirals. No birds, no insects, no tracks except old ones, layered over each other until the soil looked stitched. A den, I thought. A feeding ground. The werewolf turned to face us and made a low sound until I understood it wanted us to stop. Mason lifted the gun. Why here? The creature looked at him with something very close to pity. Then it pointed to us, not at our bodies. One by one, and I finally saw the pattern. The thing had passed over easier kills all night. It could have finished the werewolf in the clearing. It could have taken us while we slept in camp before we ever found the blood trail, if it had wanted to. It did not. It nudged. Selected. The deer in the clearing had been untouched except as decoration. The carcasses we had glimpsed on the way in were left to rot. But Carter, Eli, June. It had focused on us, on our reaction, on our bond. Humans were the objective, not because we were stronger prey, because we were stranger prey, unpredictable, capable of fear in ways that made the game interesting. The werewolf had never been the main target. It was bait, wounded enough to run, terrifying enough that people like us would get involved, visible enough to hook curiosity. That was the design. The creature hunting us had not lost its prey in the forest. It had used its prey to lure a better kind. I looked at the werewolf and understood something else too. It had come toward us on purpose, not for rescue, for witnesses, maybe even allies. Maybe it knew that once humans were in the pattern, the hunter would reveal itself differently. That thought barely finished forming before Mason stiffened. He was staring past me. I turned. At the edge of the basin, between the pines, stood something tall and narrow and almost human until your eyes tried to settle on it. Limbs too long, torso bending in places it should not. Head tilted, crowned by thin moving appendages or branches or bones, I still do not know. Its skin looked pale 1 second, bark dark the next. The face kept shifting. Blank skin. Human mouth. No eyes. Then too many. It was not flickering. It was adapting faster than my mind could hold it. And when it spoke, it used my voice first. You came. Then June S. You should have left it. Then Carter S. We were curious. Not I. That word froze me worse than the sight of it. Whether it meant a species, a shared mind, or something even older, I did not want to know. The werewolf stepped in front of me and Mason, shoulders shaking, every muscle drawn taut despite its injuries. The hunter did not even look threatened. It took one slow step forward and I understood the final horror. This was not random predation. This was selection. It chose who to follow, who to frighten, who to spare until the right moment. And now that it had learned us, there would be no returning to ignorance. Escape was no longer the goal. Only confrontation remained. I do not remember the last fight in a clean, orderly way. Only pieces. Mason firing until the gun clicked empty. The hunter moving sideways without crossing the ground between. The werewolf colliding with it hard enough to crack a pine trunk. A sound like metal tearing underwater. I remember running when Mason screamed for me to run. I remember turning back once and seeing the werewolf locked onto the thing with both arms while Mason drove a flare into the basin floor and ignited dry pitch we had not noticed spread through the needles. I remember fire climbing too fast. Blue at first, then white. After that smoke. Cold creek water. and waking at dawn 3 miles from where any map says that Basin should have been. I was alone. No mason, no werewolf, no bodies. Just ash on my clothes, blood under my nails, and a helicopter overhead arriving far too quickly for anyone to have found me by chance. The official report said wildfire confusion, exposure, and traumatic disorientation after a failed recovery operation. Carter, Eli, June, and Mason were listed as missing, presumed dead due to environmental hazards. My statement was taken 3 times by 3 different people in plain jackets with no agency markings. Each time they removed more details than they kept. Animal attack became unstable terrain. Voice mimicry became stress response. The creature became an unidentified large mammal, then later disappeared from the paperwork entirely. They told me I was lucky. They told me to rest. They told me not to speak publicly while families were being notified. Then they sealed the area for 6 months. I tried to move on. For a while, life almost let me pretend. No more forests. No more night shifts. I took an apartment 2 towns south, quit the recovery work, slept with lights on for the first month, then slowly started using only 1 lamp, then none. I told myself trauma leaves echoes. That was all. Then small things began. A tapping at my bedroom window on the 3rd floor. Not every night, just enough. My dog refusing to go near the hall closet and then whining at it for hours. The bathroom mirror showing movement half a second after I stopped. Voicemails full of static with breaths underneath. One of them had Mason's voice. Another had my own. No word, just breathing. Then last week I woke up at 2:17 in the morning because something had brushed the side of the building outside my room. Deliberate, like fingers trailing over brick. I told myself not to look. I looked anyway. Down in the alley, half hidden behind the dumpster and the reach of the security light, were 2 pale reflections. Too far apart, too still, watching my window. When the light sensor brightened, they did not vanish right away. They blinked and shifted slightly upward as if whatever owned them was standing taller than I had first thought. I closed the curtain. I did not sleep. I have not slept much since. Maybe the fire killed it. Maybe it hurt it. Maybe there was more than one, and hurting one only taught the others where to find me. I do not know. What I do know is this. The werewolf was never the worst thing in those woods. And whatever hunted it did not stop hunting when the forest burned. It just changed locations. It knows my voice. It knows my face. And I am almost certain now that it knows where I live. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you think was really in that forest. And if you heard something outside your window tonight, would you look? Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay close. Some stories are safer when you do not listen alone.